and plugged the SD card into my laptop. The screen lit up with dozens of thumbnails, Karen walking by, men unloading equipment, a folding table, plastic chairs, banners. I clicked through each clip and watched as my barn was transformed into a makeshift community center. One clip showed her standing on a milk crate, speaking to a small crowd. "We won't let outsiders threaten our peace. This land is under HOA stewardship now, and anyone who says otherwise is trying to undermine our unity." The crowd clapped. One woman even raised her hand to ask if the ranch owner had been evicted yet. "We're working on it," Karen said smugly. It was all the proof I needed. I copied the footage to a fresh drive, labeled and time-stamped it, then made 3 backup copies. The next morning, I headed to the county recorder's office to dig deeper. I requested any filings made under the name Stone Ridge Preservation Committee, or anything linked to Karen's name. It took the clerk a while, but eventually she found something. A form submitted 2 months ago. The applicant? Karen Marie Langford. The listed treasurer? Brandon Langford. I raised my eyebrow. "Any relation?" I asked. The clerk nodded. "That's her son. He's on a couple of business licenses. Mostly home security and landscaping." "Any criminal history?" I asked. She frowned. "I'm not allowed to say, but you might want to look at the open case in Jenkins County. There's a fraud charge pending." I thanked her and left with copies of everything. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of fear or worry, those days were long gone, but because my mind wouldn't stop mapping out what came next. I'd seen enough in courtrooms to know how fraud takes root. It never starts with violence. It starts with unchecked power, disguised as community service. Karen had built herself an empire of delusion, and I had the blueprint now. I spent the early hours sifting through the surveillance footage, labeling clips, and matching timestamps with what little I could gather from online HOA meeting notes and social media. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Photos of Neighborhood Cleanup Day showed my barn in the background, my horses in their paddock, the same fencing I'd built with my bare hands. I even spotted my wife's old swing in one picture, now with some child sitting on it and a caption that read, "Our community's family corner." That swing was sacred. It wasn't a decoration. It was a memory. And now it was part of her fake brochure. Before noon, I got into my truck and headed back into town. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I needed answers, and sometimes those don't come through legal files. They come from lips loosened by heat and neighborly gossip. The coffee shop near the feed store was a local haven for chatter, and I walked in like a man trying to buy a cup but ready to listen to a storm. I hadn't been recognized much since retirement, especially after I grew the beard, but 1 or 2 folks gave me a second glance. I nodded politely, ordered black coffee, and sat near the corner by the community bulletin board. Within minutes, 2 men began talking at the next table. One of them wore a Stone Ridge Strong t-shirt. That was my in. They were talking about Karen, about the fines, about a new compliance officer going door to door, taking photos of homes and issuing warnings for things like wind chimes, mailbox shape, and garden gnomes. One man said his sister got a $300 fine for having a hammock in view of the road. I waited, then leaned slightly closer. "Excuse me," I said, casual and calm, "did you say your sister got fined for a hammock?" The man turned, nodding. "Yeah. Karen said it lowered property values. Can you believe that?" I took a sip of my coffee. "She's not allowed to issue fines anymore. The HOA was dissolved last year." The men blinked at me. "Nah," one of them said, "it's back. They held a vote or something. Reinstated it." I pulled out a copy of the ruling from my coat pocket and unfolded it. There's no legal path to reinstatement without county approval and a restructuring under new charter. This says they can't operate, collect dues, or enforce restrictions. I tapped the signature. "That's mine." They stared. "Wait. You're the judge?" one finally asked. I nodded. The conversation shifted fast. They began spilling everything. Karen had been holding monthly HOA meetings, always off-book, without real minutes, inside my barn. She brought donuts, smiled wide, promised restored order to a neighborhood that was never hers. The fines were just the beginning. She'd sold parking permits, claimed she had connections with county enforcement, and even hired a group of teenagers to patrol common areas in reflective vests. She pays them in Walmart gift cards, one guy said, laughing nervously. Calls them junior peacekeepers. The humor faded quickly when they mentioned her latest stunt. Karen had begun sending violation letters with a stamp that read, "County Compliant." I knew that phrase. I'd written legal clarifications on it before. Using it without authorization was a federal offense. I thanked the men, paid for my coffee, and headed straight to the county records office again. This time I dug deeper. Zoning history, deed overlaps, permit filings. I discovered that Karen had submitted a site plan application 3 months ago claiming shared ownership over 5 parcels, including mine. The submission had been quietly rejected, but it meant she was actively trying to get government recognition. She didn't just believe the lie, she was trying to make it real. Worse, she listed her son Brandon as the organization's treasurer. I remembered the name from the day before and asked the clerk if there had been any criminal filings against him. She pointed me to the public access terminal. Brandon Langford had a pending court date in Jenkins County for financial misconduct. Apparently, he'd been running a side business installing fake home security systems, wiring up dummy panels and charging seniors monthly monitoring fees for services that didn't exist. He had 3 complaints filed by elderly residents, one of which included photos of him wearing a security jacket labeled HOA Enforcement. The pieces clicked together like a courtroom puzzle. Karen wasn't operating alone. She had help. A family ring of scammers, all hiding behind the illusion of community care. I copied every document I could find, then drove to a friend's office, an attorney named Clara, who had been a pit bull in the courtroom back in her day. She was semi-retired but still consulted on community fraud cases. I laid everything out on her table. She scanned through it all in silence, then leaned back in her chair. "You've got enough here for a cease and desist, a civil claim, and possibly a criminal referral," she said. "This is a full-blown impersonation of a defunct authority. And if the financial transactions can be tied to wire transfers or mailings, we're talking felony territory." I nodded. I wanted done right, quietly. Let them hang themselves on their own words. Clara smirked. "So what's your move?" "I'm calling a meeting," I said. "Karen's planning a 4th of July gathering at the community center. Which, of course, is my barn. I'll be there. But I won't be the only one watching." Clara laughed. "Tell me you're wiring the place." "Not just wiring," I said. "I'm bringing in a friend from the county inspector's office, and 2 reporters from the local news. Let's give them the fireworks they want." That evening, I returned to the ranch and found 3 more red flyers taped to my porch railing. One of them read, "Unapproved structure. Non-compliant perimeter fence. Subject to HOA demolition protocol." I tore them off one by one, folded them neatly, and placed them inside a folder labeled Exhibits, Evidence of Fraud. Karen had no idea how much trouble she was in, but she would soon. The next few days passed quickly. I called in favors, sent emails, coordinated with law enforcement, and prepped the evidence chain. Each time I glanced out at my lake, the place felt more like home again. I could see the way forward now. And it ended with Karen's empire collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. The night before the so-called community meeting, I stood at the edge of the barn. It looked innocent again, almost like it had been left untouched. But I knew every shadow in that space. I walked inside, placed a hidden microphone near the folding chairs, and ran a small cable up through the rafters. The camera was already mounted in the hayloft, hidden behind an old barrel. By the time I stepped outside, the sun had dipped low behind the hills, casting gold across the pond. I locked the barn doors and whispered to myself, Tomorrow, the gavel swings back. Because she hadn't just trespassed on my land. She trespassed on the law. And that was something I never let go unanswered. By mid-morning the next day, the ranch was humming with a strange kind of anticipation. Not the peaceful hum of wildlife or wind moving through tall grass like it used to be, but the artificial buzz of folding chairs being unpacked, banners flapping from PVC poles, and someone blasting a Bluetooth speaker with tacky instrumental versions of patriotic songs. I stayed inside, sipping coffee at the kitchen window while watching them transform my barn, again, into their fantasy of a community center. A red, white, and blue sign now read Stone Ridge HOA Independence Celebration, and I nearly choked when I saw Karen hanging streamers from the rafters of my hayloft like she was planning a prom. She wore a sash across her chest labeled President, as if the title had been bestowed on her by some legal deity instead of conjured up in a vote no one recognized. Her son Brandon was pacing the gravel drive, clipboard in hand, barking orders at two teenagers hauling in cases of water bottles like they were setting up FEMA relief. I let them work. That was the plan. Around noon, cars started pulling up. Pickup trucks, SUVs, even a few golf carts. They parked across my land like it was a community park. Families in red shirts and flip-flops unloaded coolers, chairs, and a general sense of entitlement. I spotted one man lighting a portable grill near the horse trough, a kid chasing my chickens across the yard, and someone trying to tie balloons to my fence post. It was surreal, like watching strangers throw a birthday party for a person who never existed. I opened the front door and stepped out calmly, wearing a simple blue shirt and jeans, same as I had for decades. People glanced at me with polite confusion, maybe not recognizing me yet, maybe wondering if I was the caretaker or some retired uncle drifting by for watermelon and gossip. That illusion didn't last long. Karen spotted me from the barn entrance and froze. Her hand stopped midair as she was taping up a flyer about the newly proposed HOA security gate. She blinked, recovered, and marched over like she owned the road. "You need to stay on the porch," she said firmly, smiling for the crowd but gritting her teeth. "This is an HOA event, not open to unauthorized individuals." "Is that right?" I said, glancing around. "On my land. Technically, this parcel is now part of our newly annexed community zone," she snapped. "It was discussed in last month's board meeting. We posted notice." "On what?" "A tree," I asked. "You don't own the roads. You don't own the barn. And you certainly don't own the people you lured here under false pretenses." She leaned closer. "You need to leave. I've called our legal rep. If you interfere with this event, you'll be trespassing against the association." I smiled then, slow and measured. "You don't understand, do you? You're standing on my barn step, holding a clipboard filled with fake rules, issuing threats from a role that doesn't exist. And now, you're going to do it all in front of witnesses." She stepped back, but it was too late. I walked past her and entered the barn, which had been decked out with chairs, a cheap podium, and a cake shaped like the state of Texas. I scanned the room. At least 40 people. More than enough. "Folks," I said loudly, projecting my voice from the front of the barn. "Before you begin, I'd like to say a few words." A few heads turned. Some smiled. One man even clapped, thinking I was just another friendly neighbor joining the party. "I'm Harris Langston. This is my ranch. Some of you might know me as Judge Langston. And today, I need to tell you something important about the organization that invited you here." The room shifted. Conversations quieted. Karen was already pushing through the crowd, trying to stop me, but Brandon put a hand on her shoulder, whispering something like, "Let him talk, it'll look better." So I did. The Stone Ridge HOA was dissolved by court order. I issued that order myself last year after reviewing months of misconduct, overreach, and unlawful activity. No board, no president, and no fines exist anymore, not legally. Anyone claiming otherwise is misrepresenting their authority, and potentially breaking the law. Murmurs broke out like popcorn. Furthermore, I continued, this event has been held on my private